Does anyone smell an upset here? What's good? It's Woog. We've got Keyshawn Davis, 11 wins, 0 losses, and 1 no contest, taking on Gustavo Lemos, 29 wins and 1 loss. This fight is taking place on a Friday on ESPN+. This is going to actually take place in Keyshawn Davis's home city of Norfolk, Virginia. And because of Keyshawn Davis's reputation, being from the same camp as Shakur Stevenson, Terrence Crawford, people just assume that the next in line is as good as the predecessor, right? The student is as good as the teacher. And in some cases, that somewhat pans out. In other cases, it really doesn't. But this fight is kind of being made as if there's a clear A side versus B side. But if you look at the records, yes, Keyshawn Davis is a former Olympic silver medalist, but he only has 12 professional fights. Gustavo Lemos has more knockouts than Keyshawn Davis has fights. And the one loss for Gustavo Lemos was in his very last fight in a controversial decision win for Richardson Hitchens against Gustavo Lemos. This is at 140. So Gustavo Lemos comes from a long line of Argentinian hard hitters. You had Lucas Matisse, Marcos Maidana, and others. You also had Brian Castano, who wasn't known to be a super devastating puncher, but if you look at the style of pressure that Brian Castano applied to the likes of Patrick Teixeira and even to Erislandy Lara and Jermell Charlo in their 2 fights, Brian Castano and Gustavo Lemos, I feel, have a somewhat similar style, and they also kind of resemble each other. Do you see it? Just look at their faces. But yeah, Gustavo Lemos, short fighter like Brian Castano, I think is like 5'7", 5'8", and was fighting at 154. He hasn't fought since that rematch against Jermell Charlo. But Brian Castano, shorter fighter. Gustavo Lemos is like 5'5" to Keyshawn Davis's 5'9". So Davis, again, doesn't have a ton of pro fights. They've been working him up on a lot of Shakur Stevenson undercards and just building him up fight after fight. Some fights he looks very impressive, like his demolition over former 130-pound champion Jose Pedraza, or in Davis's fight against Anthony Yiggett. Then he has fights that are a lot less impressive, like his fight against Nahir Albright, which was eventually overturned and turned into a no contest because Keyshawn Davis tested positive for marijuana, for weed, which is a weird reason to get your win overturned. It's not exactly a PED, but unless you're, considering the CBD based health benefits, I don't know, but it was more a Texas thing. Texas is a lot different rules wise than a lot of other parts of the country, and I guess that extends to their state athletic commission. But Keyshawn Davis, undefeated fighter, has been getting built up incrementally. Sometimes looks very eye-catching and scintillating. He puts his punches together. Good defensive fighter, good counter puncher, moves pretty well. Just a sweet scientist, with relatively long arms for the division. He's got like a 70-inch arm length. Floyd Mayweather has 72, Errol Spence has 72, Terrence Crawford famously has 74. But like Shakur Stevenson has a 68-inch reach. So Keyshawn Davis has a longer reach than Shakur Stevenson, but Keyshawn Davis is able to defend well. He's able to slip punches. Sometimes he gets kind of caught in the mud and somewhat dragged into a close quarters phone booth style fight. Not that he's avoiding it, like he's comfortable. He seems pretty comfortable fighting on the inside and on the outside. Again, he puts his punches together really well, and he's a really good slipper and counter puncher. Now, if you juxtapose that with Gustavo Lemos's last opponent at 140, Richardson Hitchens, who's nearly 6 feet tall, also a good defensive fighter, but defends himself differently. He defends by controlling range, using his even longer reach. Richardson Hitchens has a 74-inch reach like Terrence Crawford, and again, he's a bit taller. He's 5'10". Now, I know Keyshawn Davis is measured at 5'9", like according to BoxRec, according to Wikipedia, 5'9", but even though Richardson Hitchens is only on paper an inch taller than Keyshawn Davis, I get the feeling that if they were standing eye to eye, that Hitchens would look like he's at least 2 inches taller than Keyshawn Davis. That's just what I suspect. I mean, you see Richardson Hitchens against like Jose Zepeda, where Zepeda looked like he needed to swim across a moat to get to Richardson Hitchens. Never did, by the way, never got to Richardson Hitchens. Hitchens was able to easily win just about every round of that fight at range. Keyshawn Davis doesn't have the luxury of controlling range to that degree, but he does control range, but in a different manner, less so using his height and more so using his jab, his foot placement, and his accurate counterpunching to keep the guy from just jumping in the pocket and closing the distance. Now with Lemos, although again, he is a very hard puncher, I mean, he stopped Lee Selby. That was kind of his calling card as he was moving up the ranks, and then 2 fights later got the shot against Richardson Hitchens, and then after a loss, the close, somewhat disputed loss, I thought that Richardson Hitchens might have pulled it off by a round, but it really could have gone either way. Like, the moments that were big for Lemos were bigger than any of Richardson Hitchens' moments. Like, Richardson Hitchens was hurt a few times, like in that fight, but there were a lot of those rounds in between where Hitchens was really battling back, was really controlling a lot of the slower parts of the round, to where if it was like a non-explosive round, it was probably a round that Hitchens won just by putting his punches together and kind of backing Lemos up. Lemos not as tenacious in certain rounds than in others, but it turned out to be a really close fight, and Hitchens acknowledged that he was in a very tough fight against Lemos and was saying, look, the guy was undefeated, the guy's relentless. I don't think these other guys like Teofimo Lopez and Subriel Matias have fought guys as tenacious. Now, this was before Subriel Matias lost his title against Liam Paro, which we'll get back to that one. But I also thought it was kind of weird that he said Subriel Matias hasn't fought as tenacious of fighters. I think that's what he said, when you had Subriel Matias fighting Jukimbayev and Ananyan, let alone Jeremias Ponce and Ergashev. These are guys who put on some sustained pressure. But yeah, that was a really tough fight for Richardson Hitchens. So Gustavo Lemos is a hard puncher, but he's not exactly a bull in a china shop. Yes, he does pressure. Yes, he does throw some haymakers. He really he throws a lot of bombs in there, but he's not a bad defensive fighter. He actually does like that little Mike Tyson type of head movement. He'll do it in a U shape like that, or he'll just do it in that kind of a way. But he is moving his head. He's looking to slip your punches so he could come in and throw his. So by and large, I think Keyshawn Davis is about to have his hands full. And when you look at the betting odds in this one, I've seen Keyshawn Davis going off at like a minus 600. That makes him a 6-1 favorite, whereas Gustavo Lemos is like a plus 450 underdog. I'm thinking, shoot, don't threaten me with a good time. I'm really considering getting in on some of that action. Even if I end up picking Keyshawn Davis, I'm thinking like, man, those odds are looking really tasty, especially when you consider some of the X factors here. Now, Keyshawn Davis, when he says that when he stopped smoking weed, that all of a sudden this stomach issue that he was having, that was supposedly a pretty problematic issue for him, it went away. So I'm assuming that his health issues, whatever health issues he's been reporting, have gone away and that he's feeling at his best. But also, again, this is a hometown fight for Keyshawn Davis. And those of you who pay attention to this kind of thing know that there's a history of fighters underperforming when they perform in front of their home crowd. And this is Keyshawn Davis's first time in his pro career fighting in Virginia, let alone Norfolk, Virginia, his home city. So I'm imagining he's on a ton of calls and having a ton of family and friends hit him up about tickets, and just in a different environment as he's going into this fight than he normally is when he's fighting in Newark, New Jersey, or Texas, Oklahoma. So that is an X factor that I'm looking at, and I'm not looking at it as being a positive, beneficial, advantageous one for Keyshawn Davis. I mean, what did we have recently? Subriel Matias had a homecoming fight in Puerto Rico, ended up losing to Liam Paro. Back in the day, Danny Garcia had a fight in Puerto Rico, even though he's really from Philly, but he's of Puerto Rican descent, and he underperformed. Or Mauricio Herrera is just a really good boxer and outboxed Danny Garcia. But, we've had several even way more recent examples than that Danny Garcia one, more like the Subriel Matias one we've had over the past couple of years. A lot of examples of fighters underperforming in their hometown. Another one was back in the day when Corey Spinks lost in that rematch against Zab Judah. By the way, one of the best entrances. Go to YouTube after watching this video, check out Corey Spinks's entrance to that rematch. Corey Spinks beat Zab Judah the first time and retained the titles that he had won off of Ricardo Mayorga. They had the rematch in St. Louis, and Corey Spinks entered the ring with Nelly, who was red hot during that whole era. And seriously, this is one of the most amped up in terms of getting the crowd energized and stuff. That was one of the best fight entrances I have ever seen. And the broadcasters on that HBO, I believe, HBO broadcast, or it might have been Showtime, but on the broadcast, they mentioned that this was a spectacular, one of the best entrances they had ever seen. Corey Spinks ended up getting stopped in that rematch against Zab Judah. And not to say that that wouldn't have been the fate in other cities. I'm just saying that there is a long history of fighters either losing or looking very unspectacular and having fights that are much tougher than they anticipated in their hometown. And even on paper, without the Norfolk, Virginia being the venue of this fight, even on paper, I would have said, damn, Keyshawn Davis has really taken a step up here against Gustavo Lemos. Like, he hasn't seen this type of pressure before. He's fought pressure fighters, even in his last fight against Madueño. That is a pressure fighter, but not as young as Gustavo Lemos, not as tenacious, not as skilled, quite frankly. I think Gustavo Lemos has a pretty high ceiling. I wouldn't be totally surprised if he at some points has an actual world title. So that's an X factor that I'm really keeping a close eye on the Keyshawn Davis side. An X factor that I think might work to the detriment of Gustavo Lemos is the fact that he's coming down from 140 to 135 in this one. He's fought the vast majority of his recent fights. Like, you'd have to go back to like 2019, pre-COVID, to the last time Lemos fought at lightweight. So when he returned late, because remember, a lot of fighters didn't fight for most of 2020, Gustavo Lemos was out for about a year, and then he returned to the ring and he came back at super lightweight, 140, and has fought the rest of his next like 6 or 7 fights in that division. I'm thinking Gustavo Lemos, who's, pretty ripped, right? He's a short fighter, but he's built like really densely, right? I don't know how much he has to shed. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on what he looks like weighing in here. If he's looking unhealthy, I might say, wait a minute, I don't know how competitive he can be over the course of 10 rounds against Keyshawn Davis. But I do think that the 10 rounds here might favor Lemos more than Keyshawn Davis. I think that a 12 rounder would have more so favored Keyshawn Davis. But yeah, I think that this is going to be a really tough fight, and it's going to be on Keyshawn Davis to really let his hands go, because if he's not going to stop the guy, and Keyshawn Davis has some power, 7 out of his 11 wins are via knockout or stoppage, but he doesn't have great power. And I would be surprised. Look, if Keyshawn Davis stops Gustavo Lemos, then hey, hats off to Keyshawn Davis, and that would by far be his best performance, even better than his stoppage over Jose Pedraza, which I'm almost kind of looking at curiously, because I had never seen Jose Pedraza look that bad. And Jose Pedraza has fought the who's who. He's looked better against Lomachenko. Gervonta Davis was a tough fight, and that for a lot of people was one of Gervonta Davis's best wins. And Jose Pedraza still looked better against Tank Davis than he did against Keyshawn Davis. And again, Keyshawn Davis is good, but I don't think that was because Keyshawn Davis is that good. I just think that Jose Pedraza is that over the hill and came down to 135, where he had been at 140 for a while, came down to fight Keyshawn Davis. So this is 2 out of his last 3 fights, fighters coming down from 140 to see him at 135. So yeah, again, that wasn't the Jose Pedraza I know, the one that fought Jose Ramirez, Richard Comey. You go down the list. He fought so many good fighters, but I had never seen him look that lethargic. I had never seen him look that bad defensively. He looked like he just kept on wanting to come forward and put on some pressure, but he wasn't making Keyshawn Davis miss. He wasn't hitting Keyshawn Davis with a lot of punches. It was just all bad for Jose Pedraza. So again, I'm looking at that one a little bit suspiciously. But yeah, I think that the weight issue could be a cause for concern for Gustavo Lemos coming down from 140 to 135. But I think that when the rubber hits the road and these guys get in there, and by the way, this is my favorite fight of the weekend. I know Boots and Bam are fighting on another card, and who knows, maybe either Karen or Bam's opponent might overperform against the A-side fighter, but I'm looking at this one, and on paper, this one is catching my interest a lot more. I'm just really curious to see how Keyshawn Davis and his sweet science skills will be able to keep Gustavo Lemos's attacks at bay. I do think Keyshawn Davis probably, I want to say he wins the first couple of rounds, but you know, Lemos is a fast starter. Like, he hurt Richardson Hitchens like within the first couple rounds of their fight. And again, this is a 10-rounder. It's not like Gustavo Lemos can afford to give up like the first 3 rounds and then to start coming on strong, because, you know, I don't think Gustavo Lemos is going to stop Keyshawn Davis. He might get a Marcos Maidana versus Adrian Broner type knockdown or something if he catches Keyshawn Davis, who, again, when he's defending, he's usually within range and often able to slip. So both of these guys would really serve themselves well by getting off to a good start and taking 2 of the first 3 rounds. But I really want to see also if Keyshawn Davis is able to maintain range where he can make that 4-inch height advantage and significant reach advantage useful, if he can make it useful against Gustavo Lemos. Now, Richardson Hitchens, again, he made it useful, but Lemos in a lot of moments in that fight was able to close the distance and was able to really hit Richardson Hitchens super cleanly, super hard with that overhand looping right hand and so forth. So Keyshawn Davis has to be careful. I think that Keyshawn Davis in the pocket is better at slipping punches when he's not just kind of pulling back at range in the way that Hitchens does. I think Keyshawn Davis is slicker on the inside. So maybe that advantage for Davis will be more pronounced than it was between Hitchens and Lemos, to where even when Lemos is in range to hit Davis, maybe Davis is so slick that he's able to make a miss, counter cleanly and accurately, and maybe the skill gap ends up looking that obvious. I'm just not so sure. I think that, again, Keyshawn Davis is going to have his hands full. I think that Lemos is going to win some rounds here. I think that this is going to result in a close, somewhat disputed decision win. And I'm actually going to go with, look, I'm really tempted to go with Gustavo Lemos. I think that to much of the viewing audience, Gustavo Lemos might actually win this fight in terms of what we think we see. You've got Gustavo Lemos in his physical prime. The guy's still 28 years old. Keyshawn Davis is 25 years old. So you're dealing with 2 young and very confident fighters. And again, the loss that Lemos has, I don't think it's a loss that's going to mess him up psychologically. I don't think he, you could look at the way that he reacted to the decision. I don't think that he believes he lost that fight. So I think that he is still brimming with confidence, and he's getting another shot, which a lot of fighters in his predicament don't get for a long time. If you end up being a lot more dangerous than people knew and you lost a close decision against a clear A-side fighter, you usually have a tough time finding another popular fighter who's willing to fight you. But, props to Keyshawn Davis for accepting this fight. Keyshawn Davis seems like he's really wanting to show out, right? And he's going to be doing this, in front of his home crowd. I don't think that this is going to go as smoothly as he would like it to. Now, I think that he knows what he's up against here. He knows what happens with Richardson Hitchens and Gustavo Lemos. So I think that he's going to be ready to the best of his ability. Again, assuming that he's healthy, I think that he's going to be on point. I hope for his sake he minimizes distractions. I know that he stopped smoking weed. Some fighters, continue to smoke weed, and I don't really have a strong opinion whether that hurts or helps. I think that it impacts different fighters and different athletes in different ways. Like, some NBA players will smoke weed before games, literally. I mean, you could point to Hall of Famers who admittedly did so. So I think that it's more about reducing distractions for Keyshawn Davis and just making sure that you're bringing your best self into the ring against this little beast in Gustavo Lemos. And I think that he's going to largely do that. I think that he's going to win some rounds. I think he's going to be piecing Gustavo Lemos up with 3 to 4 punch combinations. But you got to be careful because, Lemos is able to slip pretty well. And he's not the type to just be eating 4 to 5 punches like Keyshawn Davis's last opponent, Madueño. Now, that fight got really, it turned into a bit of a brawl in moments. Like, it got very chippy. Madueño picked Keyshawn Davis up. They both hit each other after the bell to end the round. And I think it was Madueño who accidentally kind of hit the ref while trying to push Keyshawn Davis in the face. So it got really chippy, but Madueño was willing to just eat 4 punches at a time while trying to come inside. Not too dissimilar from, Shakur Stevenson's opponent that same night. Harutunian was willing to take takes sometimes 3 to 4 punches to try to get inside, and never really made that fight competitive against Shakur Stevenson. I know Stevenson caught a lot of flack for not stopping Haratunian, but he largely dominated that fight. Now with Gustavo Lemos, I don't see him just sitting on the outside and letting Keyshawn Davis pick him apart with 4 to 5 punches. Maybe this fight kind of evolves into that, because maybe Keyshawn Davis is really as good as some people think he is. I just think that it's going to be a lot more nip and tuck. I think Keyshawn Davis is going to have to show that dog, if you will. Is going to have to fight on the inside. It's going to have to throw a lot of punches. I don't think that you could pot shot this guy on your way to a victory. He throws too many punches. He's too accurate with his power punches, and he's too tenacious in the moments that he is. And again, he doesn't have to use his feet as much to get inside on Keyshawn Davis as he did against Richardson Hitchens, who was constantly moving. Keyshawn Davis, I think, is more take a step back, but he's not a work around the perimeter of the ring guy to the extent that Richardson Hitchens is. I know Keyshawn Davis moves not as much as Hitchens, so I think you're going to get a lot more forced exchanges here. But I also think that Keyshawn Davis will be more ready for those fireworks, for those exchanges, and I think that he's still going to do just enough to edge, and I really mean edge, Gustavo Lemos via maybe majority decision, split decision. If this is a unanimous decision that looks like it should have been a unanimous decision, again, that will be Keyshawn Davis's most impressive win. I do look at this as being a step up fight for Keyshawn Davis, but again, I think that he's gonna have a difficult time, and he again might get dropped, and getting dropped in a 10 rounder is really tough to recover from on the scorecards. But I think Keyshawn Davis will do enough, whether he gets dropped or not, will still do enough to edge Gustavo Lemos on the scorecards. Again, it might be disputed and controversial, which would be a tough break for Lemos to lose 2 super close decisions. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Keyshawn Davis, but I would not be surprised by an upset. I really wouldn't. If this ends up being a nightmare of a night for Keyshawn Davis and Gustavo Lemos ends up having his moment, I wouldn't be surprised. But I'm going to go with Keyshawn Davis to slightly, maybe in a non-impressive way. Maybe he ends up moving more than he would like to and keeps Gustavo Lemos at bay to where it ends up being, it's tough to picture this one being a boring fight because of Lemos' style, but I could see Keyshawn Davis winning and then feeling like he needs to apologize to his own home crowd because this fight was tougher than he thought, or he was less than impressive. But I don't know how aware the public and the audience in that fight, in that hometown fight, is going to be of the task at hand here. Maybe they think that this is going to be a victory lap for Keyshawn Davis. This is going to be a tough fight, and I hope people respect that if Keyshawn Davis pulls off a close decision win. But yeah, I'm going with him to do so. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments. Let me know what you think about the landscape of the 135 division. Like, Keyshawn Davis, he's on Top Rank. He's at 135. His buddy Shakur Stevenson just left Top Rank, is also at 135, but they'll never fight each other. So, you've got to look at Gervonta Davis, who I don't think is going to do a Top Rank co-promotional fight. That just hasn't been how he rolls. Lomachenko, was supposed to I wish they made Tank Davis versus Lomachenko. That would have been one of the funnest matchups of the year. I know that it should have happened a few years ago, but it looked like it was coming together. Lomachenko went back to Ukraine, said, I'm not going to fight until further notice. So I don't know if he's going to retire or not, but I was really disappointed when that one was off the table. So I don't expect a Lomachenko-Keyshawn Davis fight. William Zepeda, I hope they line Zepeda up, who's with Golden Boy. Shakur Stevenson looks like, he's, I think, with Eddie Hearn Matchroom now. So I hope that 1 or 2 fights down the road, Shakur Stevenson, I hope, returns to the ring, gets healthy again. I know that he's got like hand issues. I hope that he's fully healthy and that they eventually make Shakur Stevenson versus William Zepeda. Aside from maybe Tank Davis versus Lomachenko, I look at Shakur Stevenson versus Zepeda because of the style contrast. I look at that as being maybe the best fight at lightweight right now. And then you've got the WBO champ who but several months ago beat Emmanuel Navarrete when Emmanuel Navarrete tried to jump up another division, this time to 135, to fight for that vacant belt. You've got the WBO champ now in Dennis Berinchyk, who won a close decision against Navarrete. Maybe that's the path that Keyshawn Davis could go through to get himself a title shot, the WBO title with Berinchyk. I look at that as being a strong possibility, assuming, I don't think Lomachenko is going to come back and fight his fellow Ukrainian countrymen in a title unification fight against Berichick. I don't think that that's what they're going to do. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Keyshawn Davis is able to angle for a Berichick fight. But, I don't know if Berichick's deal is an exclusive deal with Top Rank. I think that he might be a bit of an outsider where he's free to roam a little bit. So I think that if you get enough lobbying from one of these other promoters, like if Oscar De La Hoya wanted to get William Zepeda kind of a backroom deal title shot, I think that he could position Zepeda to have Berichick perhaps fight on DAZN and defend his WBO title against Zepeda there. I look at that as being an outside possibility. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. You also have Raymond Murataya, who just won again on Top Rank, who doesn't have a belt. So I mean, I would like to see Keyshawn Davis versus Murataya, but I don't think that they're gonna do like hot prospect contender versus hot prospect contender. You know what I mean? Usually they'll have their hot prospect contender against like a journeyman or somebody who's now a gatekeeper, like a Jose Pedraza type. But yeah, let me know how you think this is going to shake out in the comments. And by the way, I don't expect Keyshawn Davis to fight his amateur Olympic rival, Andy Cruz, who beat him and was the gold medalist, turning Keyshawn Davis into a silver medalist. I don't expect Keyshawn Davis to fight Andy Cruz, who I'm looking forward to fighting more meaningful fights as his career moves along. Andy Cruz is with Eddie Hearn Matchroom. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about all this in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.